Good day, all. I just want to be very clear here that we are working with Draft 5 on June 3rd of R277238, Educational Equity in Schools, that has been put forth by the Utah State Board of Education. And there's some real issues with this, and I'm going to start at the beginning, and I have these documents side by here. Here's the board rule, and here's some suggested things that I think would make it much, much better. And I'm going to outline those for you, and then I'm going to tell you why. And I think the first issue with this is this word equity. I think that's a very dangerous word, and it can be distilled down to many interesting statements that sound good. They're wordsmithed really, really well. But equity basically means taking from one and giving to another. And it's a dangerous concept. And it doesn't produce excellence in education. It produces equality of outcome. And so I personally think it should just be educational excellence in schools, period. No qualifiers. Educational excellence, period. So when it comes to definitions, and you'll see that down here, when it comes to definitions, it is my opinion that this number 1, line 21 under section 2, super dangerous, specifically because it quotes classroom instruction, and then it has this really dangerous clause in there as the focus of the discussion. That is a very, very, very dangerous thing to put in there because it narrows the scope. And when I say it narrows the scope, I mean we go from the whole school day to maybe 10 to 20% of your school day. Because we have to remember, critical race theory is an ideology. It's a worldview. It's a way that we view the world. And it's almost a religion with tenets and doctrines and grounded presuppositions. And what happens is teachers are taught creative methods, and you'll see that language, creating opportunities in this rule. Teachers are taught creative ways to get critical race theory into the classroom when it's A, not classroom instruction, or B, not the focus of the discussion. So eliminating this language and expanding this is super important. And here it's line 21, section 2, number 1. Over here it's super similar, but my suggested language is classroom instruction means any course material, unit, class, lesson, activity, discussion, redirection, interaction, or presentation that provides instruction, counseling, or information to a student. I think that if we're going to distill what happens in a school day down to classroom instruction, we need to be very clear that the tenets and doctrines are not forced upon our children in an infrastructure nor in a subvert way. Specifically, our K-10 kids. We need to be super cautious about that. This language needs struck, and over here is some suggested language. Secondly, this is a debate about critical race theory. And it's important that critical race theory is defined in this rule. That is my opinion. I derived my definitions from this model school board language here. And this can be found online. It's free, and this is where I found this language, and I used it and modified it a bit on the right. But that's that. But we're going to go back to other definitions. So if we're focused solely on what is in this present rule, I think we need to look at educational equity, because inherently this is a terrible definition of equity, And in fact, the way the language is framed, it's very dangerous because it says acknowledging that all students are capable of learning. I believe that. But then we want to distribute resources to provide equal opportunities based upon need. So basically, one gets less than another. Period. Think on that for a moment. And what I'm not saying is that we shouldn't give students what they need. What I am saying is that we shouldn't neglect some students. Because their needs are not as great. Because every student has a need. And so this language is very dangerous because it should say redistributing resources to provide equal opportunities based upon the needs of individual students. And I want you to notice here that it talks about funding, programs, right here, policies, and initiatives that recognize a student's unique background and context to guarantee that all students have access to a high quality education. That definition, I think, is just really poor, but it's not something I can change, and it's not the focus of this discussion. If we go to number 5, line 31 in the bill, over here we're actually looking at inclusion. And inclusion means the practice of ensuring students feel a sense of belonging and support. So, first of all, we cannot legislate or rule feelings. It's not possible. What we can do is discuss instructional strategy. Inclusion means the practice of ensuring every student is heard. Inclusion means the practice of ensuring every student is invited. Inclusion means the practice of X, but we cannot legislate feelings, specifically in very diverse communities. And we have schools that have Catholic students who have an atheistic center to their culture, students who worship the Buddha. And there's all sorts of cultures that come together. And because these kids have deeply rooted and deeply held beliefs that come from home, when one student speaks from their own point of view, it is going to cause a sense of discomfort for other kids. So when you say this, inclusion means students feel safe, it's mandating that a teacher quash one student voice to benefit another student voice. And that is dangerous territory, and it's a violation of free speech. Again, we can come up with strategies of inclusion. But over here, my suggestion is to talk about inclusion meaning the practice of engaging students at the highest cognitive level possible. And this language is okay. I'm not going to quibble with it. I think it could be better, but I don't think it's going to worth forcing an issue at this time. The inclusion sentence, though, is really, really important because it's mandating that a teachers quash the voice of students, and that is dangerous. If we come into section 3 here, educational equity, professional learning. Now, if you don't know what that means, professional learning is PD, and it's how we train teachers. That's a very interesting thing that it was put in here, because the purpose of this rule is to address those two resolutions, Utah Senate Resolution 901 as well as the House Resolution 901, which are to prohibit the praxis and infrastructure application of certain ideologies that are very dangerous to not only Utah infrastructure, but they're a violation of Title VI, they're a violation of the Civil Rights Act. They have some issues. So I want to bring your attention right here to shall provide. That's a dictate. That word is a dictate. Under the law, it's a got to, have to, will do, or else. And so this says an LEA has to provide concerning equity. How are we going to redistribute our resources to force equal outcome? Think on that, because it's dangerous. Again, I think we should have professional development on educational excellence. And as we go through this, I want to draw your attention to some interesting things. Fostering a learning environment and workplace that are safe and respectful of all students and educators. Well, once again, one person's mere presence can make another person feel unsafe. That doesn't mean they are unsafe. When one student speaks from a certain point of view, and again, safety means ensuring all voices are heard. Part of making students feel safe in school is ensuring that they have a voice and that they are engaged in all parts of the learning process. So fostering an environment that is respectful is different from fostering an environment where words are viewed as dangerous and people cannot, I'm going to use the terminology, speak their truth. And so there are some students that have differing religions, some of which are very, very pagan in their infrastructure and in their deities. Some don't have deities, but they worship a certain lifestyle or a certain pathway to things. And when they speak their point of view, it makes other kids uncomfortable. And legislating how people feel is totally inappropriate, and it's too much for a teacher to handle. But fostering a learning environment where we are respectful is expected, and it should happen. And so I would argue that we strike the word safe and that we are respectful of all students. We don't always have to agree, but we need to be respectful. These are two things that you need to research. I'm not going to include them in this video. When we get to line 47, establishing PLCs, which is basically a teacher team or a small unit within an institution. And it says establishing PLCs or teacher teams or edu teams or professional teams committed to continuous improvement. I think that's great. This is where I really struggle. Individual and collective responsibility. So let's say Miguel or Johnny or Sarah or Nevaeh or even Farah. They come to school one day and they refuse to engage. And every intervention has been attempted for this child. Home visits have taken place. Is it still the teacher's fault that that child is not learning? Is it still the team's fault that that child is not learning? I have been in situations where kids are put in groups, often in quads where desks face each other, and then those students are instructed that they are accountable to ensure that every member of their group is included in learning, that that Miguel is responsible for Johnny and Sarah, and vice versa, Sarah is responsible for Johnny and Farah. One student is not responsible for another student's learning. And engaged students learn, but unengaged students, there's a 50-50 role there in terms of teaching and learning. And this terminology is also very dangerous. And I do not have an issue with that, but my suggestion is to go over here and say, establish professional learning communities committed to continuous improvement, personal accountability and responsibility encompassing the LEA, the teacher, the student, and the family. And then making this a subsection and identifying students in need of supports. I think the PLC, it can be an institutional or a building level issue, but
It's
I also
1:30.
think that professional learning community should and can extend to personal accountability and responsibility that extends to the LEA or the local institution and the district, the teacher. The individual student bears accountability in the learning process, and we should speak that truth more often. And then obviously the student's family plays a very large role in whether or not that student is going to learn. So I'm going to keep these at the top here as I go forth. If we go to D, I think we're focused too much on what makes us different and far too little on what brings us together, because if you want to produce, I'll quote it, safe environments, you don't focus on differences, you focus on what brings us together. And so this word differences is really weird. So by finding the good in everybody, I'm going to look for how they're different from me. That seems counterproductive. And again, feelings. Feelings. I can be respectful of someone, but their feelings they are accountable for. They are accountable for their feelings. And this idea that one child speaking their point of view is not okay because it might make another student feel uncomfortable. That's cognitive dissonance. That's part of the learning process. That's part of understanding and building a respect for other cultures and ideas. And cognitive dissonance is feelings. So when we start to, again, legislate feelings, we're in very, very dangerous territory. And so I really dislike this word. My suggestion for line 50, number or letter D, is acknowledging our commonalities and our uniqueness. Maybe Miguel and Sarah both really love photography. And they both really love applying the mathematics of photography to what they're doing. Maybe Farah and Nevaeh both really enjoy sports. One likes soccer and the other one really likes football. And we think of all the things that are the same that we have in common, and then things that are unique to each of those sports. And then take that analogy and build it out to people. But when we start to talk about differences, then we're really into critical race theory. And very much so. And remember, we're still in the section that the board is mandating this training about looking for differences, how you and I can't get along. And that's super dangerous. And then I think that this should be subsectioned. So you've got letter D, acknowledging commonalities and uniqueness, looking for the good in everyone, including oneself. And then showing respect for all humans, cultures, traditions, and beliefs that encompass the ideals that we are all inherently created equal. The idea that we have to go to feelings is dangerous, and in my opinion, it quashes the student voice. You can't say that because so and so worships such and such a god and it might hurt their feelings. That's unacceptable. We're in a diverse culture and all students should feel safe to speak their point of view through their lens, through their culture, and their voice should not be quashed over feelings. We should coach respect and understanding and query to gather a better knowledge base, but we cannot legislate feelings. That's a natural part of cognitive dissonance. Line 52 in this section, collaborating with diverse community members. Why do they have to be diverse? Why are we constantly bringing that up? How about we go to the content of character, skill set, fortitude, tenacity, grit, great team member. This word is interesting because it almost looks like it's a quota, and I'm very concerned about that word. And sometimes some of our communities don't have what it seems this board would consider diverse communities. And so do we have to bring them in? And I don't understand what that means. Are we recruiting diversity? Because again, we're being trained on how to talk to people who are different from us. That's critical race theory. And again, this rule is mandating it. So I would say we focus on what we have in common as a diverse culture, collaborating with community members to understand and recognize common interests and goals. Period. Period. Building a culture of respect includes this, and it's just unnecessary. It's unnecessary. Line 55, or letter F. Implementing, again, this is in the shall section. Districts have to do this. They have to train their teachers on implementing principles and strategies of inclusion. Again, inclusion is a dangerous word. Dangerous word. As they pertain to students and educators with varying abilities and backgrounds. This word I struggle with because, again, we're focusing on differences as opposed to commonalities. What do we have in common? So, implementing principles and strategies of foundational respect for all as they pertain to students and educators with varying abilities. And then going into G, which is 57, it looks like it's on page 3 of draft 5. Line G, again, is very dangerous. This whole rule, I think, has some interesting things in here. But the LEA, or the local institution, must, again, this is mandating, train their teachers on demonstrating role model responsibilities. So, are we training kids to be activists? What does that mean? It's very, very interesting to me to think about what this means through the examination of various counterpoints to a topic in an impartial manner. So my question is, what does this mean? What does it mean to demonstrate role model responsibilities through examination? Because examination to some might mean, hey, we're going to look at it and we're going to just bring it up and let people know that some people think this way and some people think this way. But to a teacher, examination means to dig apart, to dig deep into, to show the tenets of and the doctrines of. What does this mean? And how are we going to address it? As we move into H, this is dangerous. Again, I keep using that word, but if the intent of this is to comply with those 901 resolutions out of the Utah House and Senate, it's failed miserably. And so we're teaching teachers how to create opportunities. And if you don't understand what that means, they're teaching teachers how to slip things in that are probably against the rules. They're teaching teachers how to slip it in when you talk about this, or when you touch on this, it might be good to just plant a seed. So this creating opportunities is a very dangerous way of looking at that. To recognize their own creating opportunities for students to recognize their personal responsibility in contributing to conditions that preserve the rights of all individuals. That sounds good until you tell them they have a personal responsibility to go march in the street. They have a personal responsibility to speak to an issue that they don't understand, because someone told him it was to preserve the rights of all individuals. This is, again, dangerous language, interesting language, and language that I think should be struck. And then they also are taught, again, teachers have to be taught, this is mandated training by our state board, that teachers are taught how to create opportunities to recognize the student's personal responsibility to avoid the repetition of past harmful actions by individuals and groups. So it's a child's responsibility to figure out how to end slavery. Quite frankly, it's over. But they have a personal responsibility to figure out how to avoid the repetition of it. It's quite a conundrum. My recommendation would be that we create opportunities to recognize personal responsibility and exercises that recognize the rights of all individuals and how to preserve them for future generations. When we come to this next one, it's very interesting to me because I don't know what on this earth intellectual honesty is. It needs defined appropriately, or it needs struck, period. Because to me it says defending thinking the right way, defending thinking the righteous way. So are we going to tell our students how to think and insult their home culture? What the teacher thinks is what the students must think. And how you think is going to determine what grade you get on this test? Because again, critical risk theory is a worldview. It's a instruction in how to live, function, and thrive. So we are giving instruction, defending thinking the right way. My suggestion is that you strike it, period. And we defend diversity of thought, freedom of inquiry. And again, this freedom of inquiry is going to cause cognitive dissonance, and cognitive dissonance affects feelings, and you cannot legislate feelings. So if we're defending diversity of thought and freedom of inquiry, we can't legislate feelings. We can defend freedom of speech as appropriate in the school classroom. And this needs to be dived into deeper, but freedom of speech as appropriate in the school. And then freedom of association, that those are important. I would be interested to know what the board actually meant by defending association. Because when we're focused on strategies of including, and then we're defending freedom of association, I think we could run into conflicting goals, if you will. So if we come to J, this one struck me as odd because there's an element of this that's very, very interesting. And the first thing I thought of when I read cultivating supportive conditions that focus on learning and remove barriers to allow students to have accessible pathways to resources and opportunities made me think of a young boy we'll call Sam. Sam had lost his dad to a medical issue, and his mom was struggling to pay the bills. And Sam was a great basketball player, but Sam needed to get a job to help his family pay the bills. And so it's interesting to me because as I read this, I read it a number of ways. So now my LEA needs to train teachers to figure out how to find Sam and his mom a way. You know, we're removing the barrier. The barrier is the electric bill. So now we're teaching teachers how to figure out how to pay the electric bills so the opportunity can be there. The opportunity is basketball. So in order for Sam to play basketball, we've got to get the electric bill paid. So we're going to figure out how to get the electric bill paid. This whole thing just seems utterly stupid. It defies all common logic. And remember, it's a mandated training. That the state is mandating that the LEA train in this area. And resources to me are money and time and things. So if we're in the same situation, now that the LEA is forced to train me in ways to help mom get state assistance to pay the electric bill so Sam can play basketball. I just want you to think on that. My suggestion, and there's lots of different things that go with line J. There's different things I can go to that can explain how poorly this is written. But I'm going to go straight to my suggestion, and my suggestion is cultivating conditions that focus upon optimal academic learning, parent partnerships. I think you could add a few more terms in there, and then add for every student, period. If we're partnering with parents, maybe we can make referrals, but it's not the teacher's job to figure out how to pay the electric bill. So I think this really needs to be thought through in what it means in real time. Number 3 is interesting to me because it says the professional learning provided by an LEA may not include instruction that promotes or endorses that, all of these things. And this language seems really fleshed out. In fact, it seems really promising. It is my understanding that it was taken from the resolutions of the House and Senate. So again, this language seems to have come from the resolutions from the House and the Senate, which is 901. And this language is interesting in that it seems well done and it seems good, but it also seems to be out of place. My suggestion is that it's mobilized to the top of the document, maybe in a previous section, so that it's very clear. Because again, many of those instructions cause an educator or an LEA to quash the points of view of other people in order to legislate feelings. And if we're really about diversity, we need to be in defense of diversity of thought, and we need to be in defense of every single child in that room should be able to explain and defend their point of view without being quashed because of someone else's cognitive dissonance. With that in mind, I'm going to move to, it appears as if we're at the bottom of page 3, and I want to look at number 5. This is very interesting, but it uses very vague language within a reasonable time. What is reasonable? Because the training for your educators can happen, and then, oops, what happens is that it happens and then you get the document. This is before or after, right there, before or after the training is offered up upon request. And that's really dangerous, because how can you stop a dangerous training for teachers when A, you don't even know that it's coming? All that it says on the schedule is teacher PD and onboarding. And how can you stop it if you don't know what's in it? How do you file that appropriate injunction or opportunity to be heard with your local LEA if you get to see it after the fact? And if we think that these teachers are not taking this training into their classroom and playing it out in real time, we're delusional. And in an age of Dropbox and clouds and all of those things, there's no reason that the content, this is my suggestion, the content of professional learning provided by an LEA shall be made freely available by the LEA to all parents or other stakeholders in the LEA no later than 2 weeks prior to the professional learning date in which the professional learning is offered. It can be offered as a working document, finished document, or explicit outline. It must be issued upon request and include a copy of this rule when complete, and not an arbitrary. This is interesting. A compliance rubric, what is that? What's something the local LEA makes up so they can make up their own rubric and decide that they're compliant with the rule? No. USBE needs to come up with a rubric that is approved by the board that shows how this professional learning and the materials adhere to the requirements of not only this rule, but all other state codes. And as we look at this subsection 5, we do need to remember that if a teacher is on a learning plan or a professional plan, that their plan is not available for public inspection. And I believe that if you have a teacher on a remediation plan, that there should be no issue with that. So along that line, if we go into this next part, again, should be educational excellence. Excellence. How do we pursue excellence for all students? I'm struck by this language, specifically age-appropriate content, because what young educators seem to think is age-appropriate content is a little off the deep end these days. Who determines age-appropriate? Because that's a very vague thing. I don't know that I have a suggestion for what goes there, but it's a very vague way of saying that. And the argument is oftentimes by extreme teachers that if a child is old enough to experience racism, another child is old enough to learn about it. Well, if we're teaching empathy, and we're going to teach another child empathy by forcing them to experience what the other child experienced, because we're all about experiential learning these days. What is an appropriate age at which we should install an experience for a child to experience racism so that he understands it and can have empathy? At what age is that appropriate? At what age is it appropriate to bring in content about boys dressing like girls or taking hormone-suppressing drugs? This is very broad. Who decides it? And how is one going to regulate it? As we come down to the end, this kills me. It says, interpretation. No part of this rule shall be construed by an LEA or educator to prohibit or ban discussions of events. We're going to discuss how BLM turned over cars, started them on fire, and spray painted downtown. Then we're going to discuss the ideas that led them to do that. Then we're going to discuss their ideas or attitudes and their beliefs and concepts that drive them, because it's a current event. Because we're not prohibiting the discussion of even that which is included in this rule. Or from the general sharing and participation in the marketplace of ideas fostered in a learning environment. Doesn't this nullify the whole rule? Because again, critical race theory is a doctrine. It's a worldview, a religion, if you will, that has foundational presupposition, tenets, and doctrines. This nullification clause quashes the whole rule. And it eliminates the idea that we can't promote one ideology over another. There are religious sects across the globe that when they disagree with one's lifestyle, they impale them on poles. But when we say we cannot promote one ideology over another, that means we also cannot put one below the next. And this language here is broad. 1A nullifies the rule in whole. And B, I believe,
2 o'clock.
Be struck altogether. So with that, hopefully y'all can take this. Again, I don't have a suggestion here. I view this as a nullification clause, which means anything you're trying to do with this rule is voided by this nullification clause, and this should not be in there, because there are cultures that are superior to other cultures to determine truth or truth telling. We do not ask people to eat poisonous beans like some tribal nations in parts of the globe. We do not put children whom we have determined to be witches out on the streets to see whether or not they can survive on their own. So there are cultures that are superior because of their belief in the equality of humanity. And so this idea that we can't promote one ideology over another regarding a topic is interesting, and I think that this language should be struck. As always, there's different points of view, and I think that we should have calm, spirited debates on this issue. We need to focus on not legislating the idea, but legislating the praxis of the idea. And as an example of that, we teach about communism in schools, but we don't install communism so kids can understand what it really feels like. We don't even do it for 2 days because we know that the ideology is bad and installing it is harmful to people. And we have to remember that critical race theory is a worldview, a religion, if you will, that is installed into the infrastructure of the educational system. And we need to prohibit the installation and the active execution of critical race theory, as well as teaching its tenets as truth. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a great day.